In this video we're going to look at some of the hints dropped into the lore of forces we haven't seen models for yet, or that could exist and might be fun to add to the setting. We're going to be going over that today, looking at some real world history for context and ideas, and then speculate how each could be brought to the setting as a warband. We will look at Vlad the Impaler, Caine and the Varangian Guard in this video, so welcome back to the trenches and let's begin. The law says that in 1573 the Sacred Order of the Dragon halts the heretic advance after the destruction of Byzantium. 1 million heretics impaled in the hills of Wallachia. Real history tells us Wallachia is the same as modern Romania, and the impaling of heretics has echoes of Vlad the Impaler, who might have inspired the creation of Dracula himself. Vlad was the second of 4 brothers, born into the noble family of Vlad II Dracula. This is all from the Britannica website, by the way. His name, Dracula, meaning son of Dracula, was derived from the Latin Draco, i.e. dragon, after his father's induction into the Order of the Dragon, created by the Holy Roman Emperor Sigismund for the defence of Christian Europe against the Ottoman Empire. So some nice real tie-ins there in terms of the detail. I think if this is the human version of him, this man cruelly striking out at the forces of hell for what has happened, that could be good by itself, a crueler side of those who follow the Church of Antioch. But the really fun idea, and the one I'm mainly going to talk about, I think, is the forces of Dracula fighting on the side of the creator with the power of Antioch backing him up. Short insert here, not in the script. I just want to say, when I'm describing the warbands, I do speak of them in a bit of a tabletop manner, just in case you're wondering why I'm saying things that way. Anyway, the forces of Dracula. You could have them come onto the battlefield with some level of strength, perhaps set up before they end on the tabletop, and then during the conflict between the warbands, you could have them take blood from a downed enemy to unlock certain powers, drawing on Dracula lore as a whole, turning to mist, becoming a horde of bats or a wolf would all be fun. Perhaps if they take blood from one of the Order of the Beast, they could tap into those animal aspects. Now if they are vampires, perhaps the armour protects them from sunlight, and depending on what time of day the battle takes place, if the armour is chipped away, the sun gets through, that could cause them more damage. Perhaps they pull around with them people, like Michonne in The Walking Dead and her zombies, captured heretics and their limbs removed, who the forces of Dracula pull around to act as blood bags when they want to tap into their powers, and maybe the forces of hell have some counterforce who specialise in slaying them, a smaller faction within the heretics. The faction might have some sort of twisted knights that have horses who also have these blood drinking abilities, and it would allow them to go mad biting to spread the curse to others and smashing them with their hooves. And speaking of that, in some vampire lore, you have those who are fully turned and those who have just become a bride or a follower of a main vampire, a lesser vampire perhaps. They could be part of this, the brides of Dracula, who act as bodyguards or pawns and give their lives to protect him as they are at the whims of his command, with little independent thought. Those are my thoughts on that one. Next up, Caine. In the Bible, he was the firstborn son of Adam and Eve who murdered his brother Abel. Caine, a farmer, became enraged when the Lord accepted the offering of his brother, a shepherd, in preference to his own. He murdered Abel and was banished by the Lord from the settled country. Caine feared that in his exile he would be killed by anyone, so the Lord gave him a sign for his protection and a promise that if he were killed, he would be avenged sevenfold. The story may have intended to explain why a certain tribe called Caine had a special tattoo mark, and why this tribe always severely avenged any murdered member. Caine is referenced twice in the lore. I'll go over that in a second. I just want to say that little excerpt, and all the historical excerpts are from the Britannica, as is my preference. The court of the head taker, said to contain a tiny sliver of the stone that Caine used to murder Abel. This weapon allows its wielder to clearly see each spot in the body of their enemy that would bring it instant and agonizing death. This makes it a superb ambush weapon, much favoured by the hunters of the left-hand path, and another bit from the lore, the lesser mark of Caine, an inferior copy of the mark that God gave to Caine the murderer. So perhaps these could be a heretic force, some sort of cult that formed around Caine to tie into his larger lore, into one of the forces of the seven-headed serpent, perhaps whichever sin fits best. A cult who thinks Caine was right to lash out as he did and carry the stone and can see weak points in the armour of their enemies, places that, if struck, could do more damage. Perhaps the heretics have to kill one of their own members for the marks of Caine to activate and give them berserker type abilities, able to take damage without falling, and their blood babbled shouts are to avenge their fallen comrade if they fail to their own kind. If they're impatient, or if one of them falls to the enemy, they go into that frenzy. That could be a little trigger for them. Now, the Varangian Guard. In their history during the Viking Age, there existed within the army of the Byzantine Empire an elite company of mercenaries, mostly from Scandinavia. This group was known as the Varangian Guard, a regiment of warriors renowned for their ruthless loyalty and military prowess. Lured by wealth and glory, these were Vikings who had travelled the long road to Constantinople. These men sought only to serve, and for this they were handsomely rewarded. Adorned in Byzantine silk, expensive and brilliantly coloured, Old Norse sagas emphasise the lavish appearance of Varangian homecomings. Members of the Guard were the highest paid mercenaries in Byzantine service, and received frequent gifts from the emperor himself. Their origins lay in distant Constantinople. The Byzantine emperor badly needed help. Basil II was up against no less than 3 challengers and appealed to the Rus ruler for military aid. In exchange for marriage to the emperor's sister, Vladimir obliged, pledging his army of Swedes. These men turned the tide of Basil's war, and it was Basil who named them the Varangian Guard. Other than just massively built men with fine armour and axes, I'm not super familiar with how they fought. I assume they'd have to protect their leader, and I assume they must have taken on the faith of the creator. But what I am more familiar with is the Norse gods. I've had a fascination with them since I was a kid, probably sparked by reading the old Thor comics. So let's start with that idea. Whilst the Guard do fight for the church, they still carry charms for their old faith, and that's what I'm going to lean into for this faction. Perhaps some have sacrificed an eye to gain wisdom, and so sometimes when the dice flows their way, they could get an extra strike or have a moment of wisdom to get a better dice roll to take a relic at the end of a campaign. Then we have Thor. Calling down some lightning to strike the enemy would be pretty fun. I recall as well a god called Freyr who had a sword that could fight of its own accord. That would be pretty cool to free up the wielder of the sword to make an extra strike in an attack, or to move away within a sphere of influence to do something else. Freya, his sister, had a cloak of feathers that could enable her to take on the form of birds. You could do something with that, something fun, that allowing the player to have multiple attacks or escape an attack as their form scatters out of the way of the strike against them. I appreciate this takes us away from the heaven versus hell, but I think you could tie these into that by having the charms and so on, have the images and names of the old faith, but perhaps are powered by the Guard's faith in their current God, the one God, the Creator. So let me know what you think to the lore I presented here, and what it might add to the setting. Drop me a comment down below with that, and if you like this video on the Trench Crusade, or I've got you covered, why don't you try this one?